33 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ambassador, you've been in business for a long time.
I have.
So if you want to get to the bottom of something, somebody that's running a department or one of your buildings or something, who do you go to?
The boss.
The manager of whatever company
Exactly.
it is, right?
Correct.
So if you want to get to the bottom of foreign aid, probably go to the people that are in charge of foreign aid here in this town, wouldn't you? Because you're not in charge of foreign aid.
I'm not in charge of foreign aid.
And you've had to testify that you've presumed foreign aid was this or that, and you're guessing that this was tied to foreign aid. But there are people in this town who are in charge of the foreign aid. And in fact, I don't think it's very fair to you at all, or to us, or to the American people. You might be surprised that we had that person here in the Capitol, in a secret deposition, in the basement, last Saturday. Now that testimony might be pretty important to you before you're here to testify. If you could have read that, your lawyers could have went through that, because it may have clarified some more things for you about your recollection about the foreign aid. So, we've heard, earlier we heard about we had the chair looking at the cameras telling American people, talking about Watergate with their Watergate fantasies that they continue to, I guess they fantasize about this at night. And then they come here and talk about obstruction of justice because they're not giving you documents that you think you should have. So now they've laid out their clear Watergate argument or articles of impeachment. So I just have to remind the gentleman, I know we're not in a court of law because you wrote the rules, the chair here did, but I would think it's obstruction of justice to not give the American people and give the ambassador the right to look at the transcript of the man who's in charge of the foreign aid in this town. Now I could get into what he said, but the chair could release what he said. And we're not even allowed to call that witness here today. So let's talk about things that we do know are facts. Okay, as best as I think you and I and most people know them. President Trump does not like foreign aid to start with. Is that correct, Ambassador?
I've heard that, yes.
And you've testified that watching over the EU, you have 28 countries, you have neighboring countries that you work with. One of his biggest complaints is the lack of participation that those countries participate in programs around the world. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Especially NATO.
Yes.
Right? That's one of your, when you go down the list of the jobs when you get directions from the White House, when you first became ambassador, probably one of the number one things, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but on the top of the list was making sure countries pay their fair share, especially with NATO.
Yeah, and we have a very capable ambassador to NATO, so I'm not going to take her lane.
But it's one of you work with those countries, it's one of the issues that you bring up in your meetings, correct?
It is.
So, now I know you weren't on the July 25th phone call, but one of the first things that the President of the United States brings up is Germany's lack of participation. I think he names the President of Germany directly, that they're not participating in helping out Ukraine, who's one of their neighbors. Is that what you read in the transcript?
I've heard that, yes.
So the whole idea that the president starting out with he doesn't like foreign aid, he doesn't think countries pay their fair share, that's looking out for the taxpayer. But there's more, and we talked about this in your deposition. We talked about it, about how we have requirements. The Congress writes requirements into the law that require you and all the diplomats to carry out the foreign policy of this country for the President of the United States. Before the President can certify foreign aid and send foreign aid, there has to be certification that there's no corruption. You're aware of that now?
I am now, yes.
So being that you learned about that in your deposition, now looking back at clearly the challenges and concerns the president had with the involvement of high-level Ukrainian government officials, including the ambassador here in the United States that attacked him during his presidential campaign. The concerns of leaks that were leaks or just made up stories and conspiracy theories that were spun in the Steele dossier that the Democrats on this committee own. They paid for it. Other DNC operatives that were working with the Ukrainian ambassador here in Washington, D.C. to dirty up your boss, the President of the United States. We're not going to hear from those witnesses. Just like we're not going to hear from the person we deposed on Saturday. We're not going to hear about what the real reason, the person who's in charge of making sure that foreign aid is delivered, we're not going to hear about what actually happened with the foreign aid. Wouldn't that have made it a lot easier for you to testify instead of guessing and doing little funny math problems up here? 2 + 2 = 4. It's great for all the viewers to hear that. Wouldn't it be easier if you just knew exactly why the foreign aid wasn't given?
It would have been easier to testify if I had a totality of the record.
And would you trust the person who's in charge of cutting the checks for foreign aid, the top career diplomat or the top career official?
I'd have no reason not to.
Thank you. Well, Ambassador, I don't know if we'll get to speak again if we have some more magical minutes, but I'm done with questions with you. I know the rest of our members have more questions. And let me turn to, I know Mr. Castor has some more questions.
Or anything like that.
I want to get back to your...
Gentlemen, yield to a second. Of course. Which would be another helpful thing also, Ambassador, is if we actually had heard from the whistleblower and we had testimony of the whistleblower. Then you wouldn't have to be up here speculating as much and guessing because you would have a source that would have been interviewed. We have his complaint. We could have matched it up with your testimony along with the people from OMB that would have made it very easy for you to testify so you wouldn't have to just try to remember all this stuff and chase conspiracy theories around that the Democrats have continued to lay out for the last 6 weeks, moving from quid pro quo to extortion to bribery to where are we at today, obstruction of justice, and now back to quid pro quo. We wouldn't have had to do all that if the whistleblower would have testified. You wouldn't have to speculate about what the whistleblower only had in his or her complaint that nobody seems to know. Yield back to Mr. Castor.
Thank you, Mr. Nunes. I want to turn to a couple of times in your